Hello, welcome back to the high poly modelling for the turret system that we're going to be making in Blender. So in this part we're going to be working on the bracket and the caddy that actually holds the gun. In the last video we was working on just purely on the base, and so to do this we're going to be adding in a cylinder with 64 sides, and we're going to be using this to work out where the pivot for the gun goes. So if you remember from the reference, a lot of the reference that we gathered had this sort of sling back angular design where the pivot was sort of not central to the base, and we're going to be sort of doing a similar thing. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. So through a bit of trial and error, I figured out that the best way is to actually work on this hinge and then build the base from there. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm just going to use that as sort of a starting point, and then we're going to add in a cube and snap that to where the cylinder is. And then we're going to use this to create the form using booleans to cut away from the shape. So we're going to extend the bottom face of this down, and then we can angle that from where the cylinder is roughly towards where the base is. I think about 30 degrees is about right for this. Okay, that looks about right. Just going to make it slightly narrower because I'm just bearing in mind of where it sits on the actual base as well. For the front, we're going to cut away with a boolean. So I'm just going to add in another cube. Straight away using a brush boolean with difference to just take that cube away from the one we just made, and then we can just line up where we want the front of this thing to be. The way this part is going to attach to the base is I'm probably going to have it sink down slightly into the rounded part at the bottom, and then the bevel shader, which we'll be using, will sort of fuse the two together on the low poly. Can snap an edge loop into place there and extrude this across, and that will cut off the bottom precisely so that it's currently sitting in the right place. Just going to leave that where it was actually. We'll use booleans to cut that away, the back part of that away, so it sits properly on the circular part of the base. With this boolean still active, we can extrude it up and use the same boolean to basically cut away the top part. So if we bring that up there, add in another loop cut, then we can extrude that across and then just lower the whole thing to just chop off the top part of the bracket. I'm not sure if it is a bracket or caddy or whatever. Maybe there is an official name for this thing. If you know, leave it in the comments. One of the things I do enjoy with 3D is when you are designing something, like say you're making a tank, you find out a lot of what parts of a tank are called. So you're constantly learning what everything is and how it's made. I've done quite a bit of research on different weapons leading up to this series, some of which we'll be going over when I get over onto the modelling the gun part for it. Watching a lot of action films growing up, there's always details you see on weapons that you're like, oh, what's that bit called, and what does that do? Why do all these assault rifles have that rail on the side of them and things like that? You know, it's all for attachments, and they've all these things have got a name. It's quite interesting to find out what some of them are. So just using another boolean now to cut away. I want I want the cylinder that this thing's pivoting from to sort of be held in place, but I want part of the frame cut away. So I'm just trying to line that up. So I want it to be about there on the back, but I might need to adjust the other boolean. So if I adjust the height of the other boolean, it will bring back some of that top portion, because I want it to go slightly over the top of the cylinder. Again, none of these designs and shapes are set in stone. You can sort of freely adjust and move these as you see fit. So the problem with adjusting that back face there is it's either going to make it too narrow for the cylinder or too wide for the base. So I'll have to do something else for that, probably using another boolean. So the ones I've got in place, I'm just going to apply all of those. It just makes it a bit simpler to work with. Just have a look around the model now. If we add in another cube, we can cut out the middle portion of this bracket. I've got this habit of using the boolean first and then worrying about the shape of the thing. I think it's interesting because sometimes you get a sort of happy accident where you inadvertently make a different shape than what you was going for. So I'm just going to bring that down. Could have that go all the way down to the base, but I feel like it needs a bit more of a solid base with something in it, probably a motor or just some sort of large hinge from it to pivot from. Just going to scale it in a little bit to make the sides thicker. It's quite a heavy duty piece of kit, so I want to make sure it looks sturdy and up to the job. One thing I will say with this whole project is normally I would have worried about the scale of the whole thing by now, but I think I'm going to leave that till last and then just adjust the whole thing. It is a bit of a backwards way of doing it, but this is kind of a visual piece, so I'm kind of just going by eyeball anyway. Just taking that cylinder away from the base. Then I'm just going to do a bit of cleanup with the topology and sharp edges. Just using the knife tool. So K for the knife, A for angle, and C for cut through. Lets you cut lines straight through from any vert. And just going to do the same to the sides. I always merge verts afterwards, just in case I've hit any extra verts on the way through. Not in that case. And then we just need another two for these in the vertical direction. Just cut those down. Topology is not always important on pieces like this. It really depends on how much more work you've got to do to the piece, where you're adding details, if you're using normal maps, things like that. Most of the time, it does make your life easier to have good topology, because you know where your edge loops are going to go when you want to add something. I know with some artists it's a bit of a contentious issue. Some are all for it, some are all against it. The truth, like most things, lies somewhere in between. So I just want to extend these back parts. While I was playing around with some ideas, I had this detail that I found. So I'm just going to extrude those out and then change this over to normal orientation and just scale them on their local Y, or the local Y for the normal. Just check the sharp edges have taken in the right places. Seems good. considering chamfering these edges here, but I might do something to those later. For now, I think I'll leave them as they were. So I'm going to extrude this back in this way, so it sits properly on that base plate. And just need to fix up the topology here. Just going into isolation mode. Which I believe is from an add-on Nel Tools Smart Frame, which I basically got that from a recommendation from Aramus 3D. He's another YouTuber, very well known for doing 3ds Max work. I've followed him for years, and he started dabbling in Blender for a while. I think he's kind of gone back to either Plasticity or 3ds Max at the moment, though. But he's a great guy. I really love watching his work. Now we've obviously got a topology issue here where the top part is not connected to the bottom part, so we need to join those together. And I want to connect it to the bottom vert of the hole where the cylinder is. I think I had both selected there, so that was causing an issue. Can be tricky to do things like this, so bear with me. It will take a second to figure it out. As you can see there, that knife has basically landed on the edge for the geometry at the bottom rather than the one at the top, which is not helpful. If I move that down, you can see what I mean. And we basically need an extra vert on this edge, but we then can't snap it into place because that one on the bottom's moved. I do normally cut out all the trial and error parts like this, but I thought it might be useful to show some of the irritation that I go through while making this stuff. Sometimes the answer jumps out of you much more readily than others. This is not one of those times. So I've got that edge selected, so if I subdivide that, that should give me a vert in the right place, and then I can join that and snap it to the other one. Awesome. Now if I merge verts, that should remove one vert. Excellent. And just mirror that across. So it gets flipped the right way. Trying to straighten on that line, but it messes up the other lines. I'm not sure which ones I'd prefer to be kept. If I just join that one, that might work. This part isn't vitally important. This is just me sort of trying to fix up the topology in a way that I'm happy with. I might have to come back to that later, though. It's not vital for the moment. Just tucked in on wireframe while I'm looking around it as well. Just want to try and make sure this is roughly the same distance from the edge as it is on the front. Then I'm going to add in a bevel under here. about 6 segments, I think. I think that gives a good curve without much jaggedness. Yeah, I definitely like the way that's looking on that part. Then these side parts, I want to chamfer these, but again, I want to make sure they go in just enough for a certain size width on the base. We'll create a few n-gons here and there, but again, we'll fix those up down the road. It's quite a satisfying look because some detailing we'll do to the rest of it in a moment. Just going to change out the topology on this part. Just get rid of that for now. And then if we go into side view, see where this line cuts across to. It should cut across to that other vert, hopefully. Yeah, I think it does. That's it, and then I'm just going to join that up to the cylinder at the top. Just mirror that over. As I've said before, I usually apply my mirrors just so if I'm looking at it from a different side and I want to work on something, I can without worrying about what I'm selecting. So just going to save that there for the moment, and if we, I think we should move on to doing some detailing now. So I'm going to add in a grille on the front of this. Just going to go into front view and sort of put on wireframe and scale this. I don't want it to be huge, just noticeable enough. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit shorter. Just going to get the rough dimensions of the whole thing, and then use the difference boolean just to cut that away, and then just move it into place so I can work out how deep I want it to cut in. Because I'm going to have a vent actually sitting in this space on the high poly. It will be baked onto a normal map. So I'm just going to select the edge and ring, and I'm just going to chamfer the edges just to make it more angular and slightly more interesting shape. Just adding in a solidify modifier on the cutter. Just lets you adjust the thickness of the gap between the two parts. And then I'm just going to apply that boolean. Then if we go in here, we can select this, select linked, and separate by selection. I want to isolate this part and basically symmetrize it so that all the edges go all the way through. Just going to use mirror. I think the scale and the rotation are not applied properly for some reason. So I'm just going to apply those and recenter the pivot point, which I've got set to Alt S. Just snaps the pivot to the center of whatever object I've got selected. It's part of one of the add-ons that I've got installed. I can't remember currently which one. I think it's interactive tools. I think I've got a shortcut set for quick pivot. So I'm just duplicating the front faces. And what we're going to do with this is we're basically going to turn this into another cutter to cut out a grill in the front of the grill that's already sunken into the body of the caddy, or the bracket, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to inset this and then make because those angles there are going to be too small in that part, I'm just going to make this square or rectangular, sorry. So I'm going to add some lines there, mirror it all across, and then just select the middle faces, invert, and delete the rest of it. Just delete those edges because we don't need those. Now we're going to use this to create the vents. So if we add in 4 loop cuts, we get 5 evenly spaced areas for the vents to be cut from. So we're going to add in another line here for the bottom. These are the sort of vents you get indoors in various buildings. So just turn it on auto smooth so we can check when the angle is enough there. So move that back. We can delete the bottom 4 of these. If we select all of this, select the top edge, reselect it, and then we can use that to snap biactive to the bottom edge. And if we just duplicate that down with Shift D, snap it, and then Shift R to repeat the action. Then we can bridge these across. Just select both edges, right click and in. And then if we grab the top and bottom edges, we can extrude those back on the y-axis, scale them to 0 on the y-axis and bridge them. And then fill in a face on the ends of here. Now this thing, from the way it was created, is probably inverted. So I'm just going to Alt-N and recalculate outside. And that is now our cutter. If we select that and bring it in towards the other part, it should cut out the grill. And it's quite satisfying to see that just appear there, perfectly modelled how we want it. Just going to sit it back a little bit so there's a little bit of a lip before that bottom angled part. And just apply that boolean. And yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Just going to save that there. Okay, now we're going to work on a detail on the side. So we're going to add in a rounded cube and change the preset to quad sphere. If you don't add this, it's one of the default Blender add-ons. Again, I've got a video that I've just uploaded with all the add-ons I use. It does include all the default Blender ones. So if you want to have a look at that afterwards, it will be in there somewhere. Just to let you know, the first probably half of the video, it's only 2 minutes long, but the first half is pretty much an advert for Simon Fuchs' Blender drone tutorial, which is where I got all my hotkeys and add-ons from. I basically use his entire setup. His is a paid course, but all the add-ons he suggests are all free. But I wanted to make a video because there are a few things I do in my videos that aren't obvious. A lot of them you can do without the add-ons, but it's just easier to do it with the add-on sometimes, especially if it's free, it's not costing you anything. So I've just extended half of that quad sphere back to make this sort of torpedo shape, and I'm just going to bring that in and line it up with the front edge just as a temporary measuring device. So I'm just going to bring that all the way forward, not quite to the end, but near enough. Now I'm going to duplicate a copy of that underneath, and I'm going to sort of space these out evenly so they're roughly the same width as each other and through the part on the back where they're going to cut through. So get them there. Then I'm going to bring them back slightly because I don't want them all the way up to that edge. I want quite a nice border around this part. So now I'm going to use this piece of geometry on the back here to make a cutter. And the purpose of this cutter is to bring back the geometry at the back of where those torpedo shapes are cut out from. And the reason for that is because if you leave that geometry there, you're going to have to model it in on the low poly. because from a certain angle you'll be able to see the silhouette where it's cut away. Whereas if I make this shape, and I'm going to use this to bring back some of what the other boolean has just cut away, and I'm using that face so that it's at the same angle. So as you'll see in a second, I'll bring this in, just recalculate outside just to make sure there's no issues, cut it away from the other boolean, and then if I bring that forward on the y-axis, you'll see it brings back that edge at the right angle. And this is the difference between this side detail needing geometry or being able to get away with just using a normal map. Can now apply the cutter, apply the boolean, sorry, and we can just mirror that over when we're ready. All of the edges will catch highlights from the bevel modifier that we're going to use. Going to work on the gun's pivot now, this giant cylinder. And we're just going to snap this into place. The part that actually cradles the gun, I'll probably save that for the next video. Because there's something I want to do with the gun and the ammo system for it, where I'm going to kind of need to create both at the same time, but I'll show you that as I get to it. So just beveling this, the edge of this with 6 segments. I did 3 loop cuts through the middle of that cylinder to start with, just so that I could clamp it to the outer edge of those 3 loops. And I'm just going to insert that. And now one of the things that's quite a good thing to do with design is to use repeating elements. So to that end, I'm going to basically use these bolts that I made for the base, and I'm going to snap them into place, and basically use the same bolts again on this pivot or wheel or whatever it's called, the part that the gun hinges from. So I'm snapping that to that, and I'm just going to bring it down on the z-axis. Again, this is similar to the boolean detail on the side. If I had that detail, originally I had a cutout for this that went out through the edge of the wheel, and the problem with that is, again, from a certain angle I'd need to model in the geometry. So to avoid having to do that, I'm going to put it further in towards the middle of this wheel. And I'm just going to add in another cylinder and snap it straight into the middle of there. Obviously it's huge, so I'm just going to scale that down in place till we can see it. Rotate it on the y-axis 90 degrees. And just going to scale it up so it's not only bigger than the bolt, but fits nicely within the geometry of the wheel, because we're going to have it cutting away from that. I've got 32 verts on this cylinder, and I just want to snap the back of this to the back of the bolt. Just going to shade that auto smooth and then boolean it away from this wheel. And you can see there that where there's some Z fighting on the faces of the inner part of the bolt, I've not snapped the back of the cutter to the right of the bolt. So I'm just going to move that back a little bit. And then you can see that hole is deeper than before. These considerations with what details you need geometry for and what's going to be caught by bevel details or normal maps is something you need to think about. It's not always obvious, but as you do more and more of these, you'll get used to it. Just going to adjust that a little bit. You can always adjust these live cutters, either selecting an axis or excluding an axis. I've shift X'd on that to exclude the X-axis, because I don't want it to move away from the back of the bolt. And just want to think about how I'm going to connect this. And there's several ways of repeating circular details around an object like this. So if I apply the cutter, it does create extra verts on this geometry. You can fix up. This part of this wheel is flat, so again, that's because of the way we've placed it, that shouldn't be causing a problem. I think what I'm going to do is, if I delete these faces around here, then I can delete these edge loops. I want 11 cuts through there, and then I'll be able to bridge everything together. And if I select that, I realise that I've still got extra verts on this inner part that I need to get rid of. So I'm just going to delete those, just the ones that are not holding the shape of it. You can usually see them because there'll be a shading error nearby. So yeah, just clean those up. It doesn't take long. There are quick and automatic ways of doing cleanup on extra verts like that, but sometimes they don't work, so I prefer to just do it manually, then I know it's done. Then we can bridge those edges together. And I'm just going to collapse those edges all into the center, because what I want to do is, if I basically isolate this area in the middle here, I can invert and delete the rest of it and then rotate the detail around. So I'm just going to shift select all of this, select all of that, select all of these. You can always remove the fan shape from the middle afterwards. That's everything. So if we invert that and delete, and then if we change this to active element, we can select all of this, deselect and reselect the center point, and then if we shift D, RX and 45, and then shift R to repeat that detail around, and then merge all the verts, we get our wheel back with all of the holes cut out and properly modelled in with the geometry. So I'm just going to insert this middle face and then just move it towards the centre on the x-axis. I just want to scale that in just slightly by its average, and maybe scale the middle part up. Looks a bit too, looks a tiny bit shallow. So select that convert it to faces and then scale that up. Just want it to look more of a deep chamfer on that part. Next we need to basically rotate around the bolts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snap the 3D cursor to this wheel and then use the 3D cursor as the pivot point for the bolts. So I'm going to use linked duplicates for these. So Alt D, RX 45, and then Shift R to rotate them all around. And because they're all linked duplicates, when you edit one, it will edit all of them. So I'm just going to edit this middle part of this bolt. I just need to change that back to the other transform point. I just think it gives a bit more readability from a distance. All of these bolts as well, before baking the normal, I'm going to try and remember to actually rotate them in their individual cutouts, just so that they all look unique. I want to do the same bevel on the other side. So just going to do that. Full clamp with 6 sides, six edges. Merge all the verts. And then I want to kind of indent in the middle of this. So I'm just going to bevel this center line. Change it to faces and inset it slightly. And then scale that, excluding the x-axis with Shift X, just so it catches that chamfer there. It's quite cool. Next, I just want to get rid of that fan and replace it with an Ingon for the time being. I'm just going to duplicate it over here and flip the faces, and then snap it into place so that it's the same on both sides, or this part of it is. And then this inner part, I'm going to turn this into the caddy that actually holds the gun. I'll see you in the next part. Thanks for watching. Take care.